Well, good afternoon. I want to start by acknowledging the George Floyd family who are at the private memorial service in Minneapolis this afternoon, and the thoughts of our community and the rest of the country are with them. And I want to acknowledge Minnesota Attorney General Keith Ellison, who did the right thing. This was a second-degree murder case. It should have been charged that way in the first place. The officers who were there should have been charged with second-degree abetting, and I think these are the appropriate charges. I'm confident they have the legal strength to see them through, and so we've taken one step. We have a long way to go in what we have to do with racism and criminal justice in America, but we took one step. And I'm hoping we took a significant step in this community with the protests last night. And I want to go back and talk about the history of the curfew, because I'm asked a lot of questions about how did this work and what was the reasoning. And I think the public has a right to know the thinking and what was behind it, because I feel very strongly that we have done the right thing. When George Floyd was murdered a week ago Monday, 10 days ago, as Wednesday and Thursday protests started to emerge across this country, we didn't do a curfew. Friday, when the big protest was staged here, we didn't do a curfew. We didn't ask for the National Guard. But Friday night, we saw something that at first we didn't understand, is that in the evening, the leaders of the protest, the march, were gone, and people we had not seen before were stirring up trouble and conflicts with police officers, really provoking them throughout the night. And while we avoided kind of major problems, the chief and I talked Saturday morning. And we said, was this a one-time thing, or do we need to act? And we decided that we did not want to have a curfew, that we did not want to restrict the people of the city from being able to express themselves. That almost turned out to be a very serious mistake, because Saturday night we learned this was no fluke. After an absolutely peaceful protest all through the city, when things turned dark, the organizers of the protests, the ones who started them off, we couldn't find anywhere. But there were people with bullhorns directing traffic with walkie-talkies we had never seen. And we picked up the walkie-talkie traffic, telling the two groups to meet at police headquarters where the police officers were waiting. The police officers weren't going after them. They sent the crowd there, and we saw resupply trucks that were passing out rocks and fireworks and spikes from railroad ties, and they were throwing them at the officers. And that night, as people went through the streets, we heard story after story that Detroiters stopped a lot of destruction. And so Sunday morning, Chief Craig and his team and I, the command staff, talked for a long time. And we said, if we don't change what we're doing, we're going to lose the city Sunday night. We really believe that. And we said, what do we do? There was a lot of pressure on me from a lot of folks to call in the National Guard. 28 states have had cities call in the National Guard. And the chief and I decided we're not doing that. That if we're going to get through this, it's going to be because of the trust between the people of the city and the Detroit Police Department. We felt like we were going to rely on each other and not do that. So the next question was, well, we can't not do anything. And what the command staff said is, these folks from out of town are confronting us after dark. They're not doing it during the day when we can spot them. You have to give us a chance to deal with them while it's daylight. And so we put in an 8 o'clock curfew and figured that they had been picking the time and the location of the confrontations. We were going to at least require it to happen in the daytime. I didn't want to stop anybody protesting. I really thought that being able to protest from 8 in the morning till 8 at night, that the public would understand that the chief and I, we agree with the protesters. We agree with their cause. We want the voice to be heard. We want Detroit's voice to resonate across the country, but we couldn't put our officers and we couldn't put the city at risk. Monday, it ended peacefully, and I think maybe it's clearer now. This was not the kind of curfew you might see in other cities where at 8:01 everybody rolls in. I happen to think we have maybe the best police chief in America.
Thank you.
And I said to Chief Craig that the 8 o'clock is a guide for you to use to protect the officers in the city. And if you believe we are safer by doing it at a later point, you use your judgment. Probably not. Too many mayors would say that to chiefs. And on Monday night, we saw it when the group came back very late and the city held off, the police held off till almost 9 o'clock. And again, we don't actually know. The groups shift from day to day. Were they planning to come in after dark to go in and break things, or did they just pick a route that ran too long? And so Chief Craig said, we're not moving. And we all watched as Stefan Perez, as it turned out later, they just had taken a route that had taken too long, and it ended without incident. And so last night, after what was, to me, what should be a day of unity with the charges against the Minnesota police, Chief and I talked and said, wouldn't it be great if the night could end in a day of unity? And I could not have been more pleased when the chief called at 8:30 and said, I've been out here with these folks. I don't think there's any risk. I'm just going to let it go. And it's his call. He had the courage to do it. We had police by if something had happened. But he had the courage to make the decision. It was the right decision. And so I will be very happy when I can get to the day there's no curfew at all. We don't have this discussion. I don't think we're very far from that. But at least for the next day or so, we're going to continue with the practice we have, which is an 8 o'clock curfew that the chief can use if he feels it's needed to protect the safety of the community. So I do want to say to the protesters yesterday, you were terrific. The protesters at my house, too. We had almost no police presence there, and they were great. They were expressing their opinions about me, but they didn't do any, they were totally respectful to the folks in the neighborhood, and the last few people actually cleaned up the trash from the lawn. So this is the way it should be. You should be able to express your opinion very strongly. It's the people who are the protesters that affect change. And in this city, it's a time-honored tradition. And I just wanted everybody to know that we're going to use this only to protect the people of the city. And I just look at what's happened in the last week in Pittsburgh, in Cleveland, in Columbus, in Cincinnati, in Indianapolis, the devastation across Chicago, Milwaukee, and even Grand Rapids and Lansing. The police have done a good job, but the great majority of the credit goes to Detroiters. What you hear through the city every day is, we're not letting it happen here. It is the pride of everyday Detroiters that has been responsible for where we stand. But we know every day that we could end up like all the other major cities in the Midwest. And I'm hoping we can get through this with unity and not any more conflict. And with that, I'll turn it over to a man who I just think has done a remarkable job for the last week, Chief Craig.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I appreciate it. Let me just start my remarks out by also recognizing and acknowledging the Floyd family as they're memorializing Mr. Floyd for the senseless death. Also want to offer our prayers to the NYPD. As you may know, last night, 3 officers were injured. One of the officers was stabbed, 2 were shot. It appears that all 3 are going to recover. Today, and the mayor talked about it, and some of what I would say will sound repetitive, but I really want to again thank the community. Certainly that has really made a difference. I've had the great opportunity to talk about the Detroit experience across this country. People want to know. I think there's a sense that people would have thought, well, If it's going to go bad, it's going to go bad in Detroit. And I really believe our community has stepped up. Yesterday, when we did our press conference, the fact that we were in the community where we made some arrests, the community stood with us, and it was one voice. It was the police and the community, and really that's what defines who we are. But one thing I haven't stressed, we talk about, our community leaders and activists, but what many of you don't know, they're volunteering their time and effort. They're doing this because they deeply care. I mean, they are putting in hours, and certainly Deputy Chief Bettison would tell you. So I want to publicly acknowledge a few people that have really gone out and volunteered their time. Certainly who have joined us at this table, Pastor Mo, also Tafari Brent, Ray Winans of D-Live, Fuqua Bey, who is the Grand Sheik of Temple 25, Morris Science Temple, and Reverend Rideout. And I know there's so many more, but that's Detroit. These folks have decided that we're not going to let outsiders, they're not going to let insiders tear up the city. But when you come from the outside, that's special. And I can tell you, in addition to those, there's so many who don't want recognition that are really working behind the scenes. They're not visible, but they're here, and they're really working hard to maintain peace. So as much as I talk about this great police department, and it is, I certainly want to talk about our other partners, the community. And as always, the Detroit Police Department, exemplary, professional, and I recognize that we've had a few complaints over the days, and my commitment remains that if an officer steps outside, that we would promptly investigate in a very transparent way. But these men and women who haven't had a day off, they're dedicated, and they're always flexible to adapt. We adapt very quickly. As the mayor alluded to, we're talking about an organized, coordinated effort by what I refer to as these outside agitators. I'm not going to put a name of what organization they might be with, but the fact that we're clear, and it's consistent throughout this country, that these are outside agitators who are focused on one thing: disruption, engaging in criminal behavior. And so the department must remain nimble, flexible, and committed to keeping this city safe. As the mayor indicated, the curfew was imposed for one reason only: to mitigate and eliminate any and all threats. That's the focus. It's a tool that certainly we have and can use, and I think it's beneficial. As the mayor indicated, while we've had some support from our federal and state partners, aerial support, intelligence support from the FBI, but by and large, it's been the Detroit Police Department on the ground managing this quickly evolving situation at times. So this was a day yesterday. I'm going to talk a little bit about yesterday. We, as the mayor indicated, a day of celebration. The officers were charged, and I'm not certain that was impactful across the country, but it certainly gave many a sense of closure. I had a chance to really monitor the protesters last night, up close and personal. I spoke to many of you when I was on the route, and I felt very strongly that it was peaceful. Their message was on point. Of course, I took exception when they used the inappropriate word relative to what they call 12, meaning police. But that's not the issue. The issue really is that they were peaceful, and they certainly have a right, and we embrace the message. We embrace the fact that this should have never happened. And so I'm encouraged, but we're going to continue to make sure they're safe, because part of the issue when you talk about the small few that want to be disruptive, and engage in criminality, not only has this placed our officers at risk, but it's placed the protesters and onlookers at risk as well. So we're thinking about their safety. We're thinking about the safety of the onlookers and certainly our officers. So we will continue to evaluate in the coming days. But I want to tell you, and the mayor talked about the professional relationship between myself and Mayor Duggan. You know, I've worked in 4 different cities. I've seen different relationships between mayors, police chiefs, and this is my 3rd city as police chief. In those 2 prior cities, I had relationships with city managers who reported to the mayor and how that relationship went. What was interesting, this is kind of a look on the inside, as the mayor talked about. We talk daily, multiple times. He wants to understand where I'm going. He's put confidence in my decision making. And ultimately, if the decision I make is a bad one, it's mine to carry. But there's something called trust, and trust is so important. And many times, I don't always know where we're going to go. I certainly rely heavily on my team. I have a great team, the command and executive team, and we're constantly talking. We're weighing the what-ifs. And we didn't get here just because of this. This is the way this organization operates. In fact, I'll call it a constant state of readiness. We were prepared for this. I won't go into a lot of details, but I will say this. Probably now almost 4 weeks ago, I had a private conversation with my executive team as to what we needed to do. And this was primarily looking through the lens of the impact COVID could have on our community. And we prepared, we enhanced our training, and then this happens. And so, again, my team responded, and I couldn't be more prouder. But I know that I had one situation when I was chief in Cincinnati. It was kind of interesting. And this is when we had all the Occupy America, LA, Cincinnati. And the city manager and I, we concurred. A decision was made. He trusted my decision that we would take enforcement action at a given time. 5 to the hour, the mayor called the manager and said, "That's not going to happen." And he tried to explain, well, I trust the chief. I think this is the right thing to do. Not going to happen. Didn't happen. Well, of course, as things would happen, the following day, big fallout. City was angry. And so it's always good that you can have a relationship with a mayor, city manager, where you can work together. I don't have all the answers. I have experience. I've seen a lot. I've done a lot. But I certainly don't have all the answers. And so the mayor's lens and my lens may be different, but what's consistent is the fact that we care about this city, we care about the safety of this city, and we respond quickly. So with that, I just want to say, Mr. Mayor, thank you for your leadership, because that has made a difference.
See if we can have a safe night tonight.
Yeah.
One of the things we want to continue to emphasize, and we're starting to see COVID-19 start to rise in some states where they've loosened things, is that when you're out there, please keep the masks on, stick to the social distancing. We made such enormous progress here. And with that, I'll turn it over to Denise Fair.
Thank you, Mayor. So a few days ago, I mentioned how proud I am to be a Detroiter and proud of the city. You all decided to take this seriously, and that's why we are seeing less new cases every day, and this is the work that you did. But we are not out of the woods yet. The work is not over. We are still experiencing active transmission, so COVID is still here. Today we have 11,145 cases and 1,389 deaths. This is far lower than we've ever witnessed, and the trend continues to go in the right direction. Now, the city is reopening, which is a good thing. Libraries and museums are opening, outdoor pools and day camps, retail shops, restaurants. We can now have large gatherings up to 100 people. And we are being intentional in how we are reopening. We are allowing the data and the science to guide us in our decision-making. But what I'm finding is that other states have opened, and they've opened a little bit too soon. And we, in Detroit, we are not in a rush. Just in particular, Wisconsin. So they have experienced a spike. They opened up on May 13th. Their stay-at-home order was lifted. And just 2 weeks after the order was lifted, they've had a lot more cases, a lot more deaths, even more hospitalizations. They had about 200 to 300 new cases, and now they have 400 to 500 new cases. And I don't want that to happen here in the city. We've worked so hard. And we know that large groups have contributed to COVID spreading. And again, we've really worked too hard. We really can't go backwards, and we don't want to have another spike. I talk constantly with public health professionals all across the country, and in Minnesota, they're also sharing my concern as well. Their thought is that they may be experiencing the increase of spread of COVID-19. And in fact, in the state of Minnesota, they're reporting 29 new deaths in their state just today alone. And again, this is really concerning. In Detroit, the last few days, we've seen a number of large gatherings with our protesters, and I applaud our protesters for using their voice to drive change. Let's keep walking together. Don't be silent. Use your voice. We need you. But I urge caution. When you are walking in those large groups, some of you are shoulder to shoulder, please practice social distancing. Wear your mask. And let me just take the time now to show you how to properly wear a mask. So this is a surgical mask, and make sure you put it around your ears to keep it there. But what I've seen is people wearing the mask around their chin, and that does not protect you at all. It may be a fashionable statement, but we're Detroiters, we know what to do, so make sure that you're wearing it over your nose and over your mouth. That will protect you. And so we all have a part in keeping our city safe, and I'm encouraging each of you to take this seriously. So employers, your job is to make sure that your employees feel safe as they come back to work. And customers, they need to feel safe as well. If you need guidance, remember there are resources available at the DetroitMeansBusiness.org website. Go there now and make sure you have the tools that you need. Restaurants and grocery store owners, your employees should be wearing masks at all times when they're interacting with customers and when they are preparing food. Your staff should know what the safety protocols are so that when customers call and ask, what are you doing to prevent COVID? Your staff know how to respond. And residents, finally, I'm encouraging you to continue being accountable. Wear your mask, practice social distancing, get tested. And I can't say this enough. You may be incredibly healthy, but you could be asymptomatic. So Mayor Duggan has made this possible. You can call the call center and get tested. You don't need a doctor's note. It's free. That number is 313-230-0505. Again, 313-230-0505. Please call. You can call today and get in tomorrow. So again, we all have a responsibility. I'm really proud of the work that we're doing. And with that, I'll turn it back over to the mayor.
We'll take any questions.
Hello.
Good
Just
afternoon.
have one question from Roop Raj for Chief from Fox 2 News. Not sure if you're familiar, but Attorney General Dana Nassau is writing a letter to Congress urging them to allow police departments to be investigated instead of the Department of Justice. Wanted to see if there's any comment from the police department.
I'm not sure I understand the question. I'm very familiar that DOJ has investigated police departments, whether it's the FBI or some other entity. So I don't know if she's talking about something separate from DOJ, but I'm very familiar with outside agencies. I know that even locally here, when we have officer-involved shooting incidents, it's a joint Detroit Police Department MSP team that does the investigation. I haven't seen, so I'm not certain I know.
Thank you.
Okay.
Good afternoon.
Afternoon.
ML Elric, Detroit Free Press. Chief, I was wondering if we could get an update, or anybody from the city, on the encounter on Gratiot on Tuesday. We saw a woman who was taken away on a stretcher after most of the protesters who were being detained were put in a bus. Do we know what happened to her?
I don't know. We can certainly get that to you at some point after the briefing.
Okay. And then thinking about Tuesday and Wednesday, both marches that started downtown, both fanned out across the city, yet one ended with police deciding that this was as far as it was going to go, and then Wednesday, they were allowed to turn and come all the way back. What was the difference between those 2 days that led to different calls from, I presume, from you, Chief?
Well, it's a constant evaluation. As I indicated, sometimes it's just the feeling you get in your assessments. We operate using intelligence. That's no secret. And so I'm getting real-time intelligence, so the response may be different. I was monitoring the first day, the curfew, and then also yesterday I was monitoring. So it was a call I made. I think it was the right call. And fortunately, there was minimal injury. I recognize that any time you go into an arrest situation, sometimes force is used, and it always heightens the risk of injury. Even in that situation, as I pointed out during a presser, I think it was yesterday, officers sustained abrasions and laceration, and some of the protesters described some discomfort as well. So it just depends, but it's not done in a knee-jerk way. But I felt very strongly that yesterday it was the right thing to do. And I'm optimistic that we're going to have another night of peaceful protests.
Given the fact that, hindsight makes everybody smarter after the fact when it's too late, but seeing how things ended on Wednesday, is there any party that wishes you had said, well, let's see where this goes on Tuesday, in case they're going to turn and come back, and we can just
I still
avoid
think
lines?
the decision was appropriate. As the mayor and I both indicated, the curfew was designed to mitigate any threat of violence, destruction of property. And it's no secret, just a day, 2 days prior, we're dealing with attacks on police officers, property damage to police vehicles, as an example, and then watching the trend across this country. I watch what's going on because I'm seeing similarities, and so it's real important for me to always stay ahead. And so again, I think it worked as intended.
Okay, and can you share with us what some of the factors were you were aware of Tuesday that made you think this has gone as far as we can let it go?
Again, I rely heavy on intelligence. I'm not going to go into a lot of detail. I don't really talk about intelligence, but let's just say some of the intelligence is what I see, what I hear, and I form and make decisions based on it.
Okay.
And I still, as I said to you yesterday, I'll say it again, I felt it was proper.
Okay, just for those people who were in the midst, both marches seemed to have the same character, but certainly the ending on Wednesday was much different than the one on Tuesday, so,
Well, we would probably disagree in part.
okay.
There's things I know that you probably didn't know, and I know you were embedded.
This is a great time to roll those out.
I know.
Okay.
I know you were embedded, but let's just feel very comfortable about the decision.
Okay, thanks, Chief.
Personally,
And
okay.
we heard that there may be some consideration, and certainly the protesters are demanding that those who have been ticketed or charged, that those charges be dropped or those tickets dismissed. Do you have a position on that? Does the city?
We're gonna look at that over the next week.
Okay, so that's
So
still.
we're evaluating that right now.
And
Okay,
Emil, I just want to also say in
Yes, sir.
closing on that part, we don't want to arrest.
right.
As the mayor has indicated, certainly the free speech, the message, they have that right. And again, I think I illustrated, some of the things they say is troubling. I don't have to agree, but they have a right to free speech. Carrying of communist colors, that's that person's right. So.
Okay. And we've seen other officials, we've seen some police kneel, we've seen some offer a salute. Is there a point, maybe this afternoon, where either of you may go out and meet the folks who are going to be gathering very soon?
I walked earlier today with Bishop Ellis and joined them in kneeling and a prayer over at Wayne State. So there was a march, multi-faith march this afternoon, which I participated in that already. And my heart is with the message of the protesters. And I'd like nothing better than to be able to look at this and get out of it with people feeling good. I think about these curfews. Cities in the country were putting curfews out on COVID because people were out and gathering at night. And health director said, you've got cities doing curfews. But in the city of Detroit, it doesn't sit well. And I didn't do curfews for COVID. I don't want a curfew now. And I'm looking forward to the day that we can get rid of it. But most of the protesters don't remember 1967. The chief and I do.
Yeah.
And we wake up every morning not wanting to have the regret of acting too slowly and have to live with that with the rest of our lives. And so people may evaluate afterwards that we were too hard. But I think if you look at people in the other cities in the Midwest, I think they might have a different perspective on that.
Okay. Is it fair to say that it's too soon for either of you to meet with the people who are going to march again tonight?
I meet with anybody who calls anytime, but again, nobody has called me for a meeting, but I'll let the chief decide. Once he's out there, it's his tactical decision on what he does. And
I've met with Detroiters, first and foremost, Detroiters, who I work for, I'm most concerned about. It's not to be dismissive of the many Metro Detroiters that are here, but I am concerned about the Detroiters. And I'm going to be candid with you, ML. Many Detroiters that I have talked to will not, they feel the same way about the message. They clearly agree with the message. They just don't agree with what has happened. And so this is why it's not the number of Detroiters. Many are staying away. They agree with the message. They're just staying away. And so whatever decision I make, certainly I'm going to first consider Detroit.
Thank you.
Hi there, Darcy Moran, Detroit Free Press.
Doing?
it's good to see you doing well.
Thank you, I appreciate,
And thank you for the way you handled that, and I
Yes.
want to apologize myself.
appreciate that. I'm gonna move forward here. We've certainly heard a lot of positivity about how police have handled this, positivity from the neighbors. However, we've also heard language from people saying that they have been arrested walking to their cars, they've gotten tear gas that way, rubber bullets. You mentioned that there are some complaints. Are there specific officers under investigation?
There are. In fact, I'm expecting a briefing after this relative to one case. And so we take all cases seriously. Even tonight, when we executed on the curfew violations, there were a couple of individuals who wanted to make complaints. We had our internal affairs respond. Some opted not to go forward, didn't want to move forward. Candidly, some of the stories shifted, but we will take and do the investigation. We're committed to that. The video that was circulating with certainly a person being pushed, or several, take that serious. We have an investigation on that. And so that's not reflective of the number of officers that we've had deployed. As you can see, we've had a large number of officers. We would rather there not be one incident of an allegation of demeanor or where force was improperly used. But we will investigate all allegations.
How many complaints have there been?
I don't have the number. Off the top, the ones that are most notable, there's 3 that I'm aware of.
And then you mentioned that you wouldn't name the specific group that you believe may be involved in some of these agitating actions. However, is it a singular group that you guys are looking at? Is that the intelligence you're getting of a singular group versus many?
We don't know. So when you ask a police officer or former prosecutor, you don't say anything until you have your facts. And so there are theories around this country as to who's responsible, but we don't have the facts to know who it is, and they haven't surfaced in the last few days. So we're not going to make any accusations until we have facts to support them.
And then just a clarification, you referred to Friday night, Mr. Mayor, about the spikes and the supply trucks bringing in rocks.
That was Saturday night, yeah,
Saturday night.
Saturday night.
Are you guys able to say for each of those nights what the action was that mandated or moved you to ask for direct contact? Was it the witnessing of those trucks where you say over the radio, let's move
Contact.
forward? Direct contact with protesters where you guys are trying to move them? Or
Do you remember Saturday night, the police didn't initiate the direct contact. The protesters took their 2 lines of protest and decided to go to police headquarters and confront the police where they were stationary. So that was not a decision by the police to initiate contact. It was a decision by the individuals to do that, to try to get as many angry people as they could to initiate the contact. I mean, you guys really should, you have it all on film.
And not only that, let me just add, do you recall that there were projectiles thrown at police officers? That one of our command officers was struck in the head? Police cars were damaged? We didn't initiate that. As I've said, and I'll continue to say, we want to support a peaceful protest, but we can't tolerate criminal behavior. We just can't. And I'll tell you candidly, I'm not going to sit back idly by and watch intersections where people, there's total anarchy, violence, destruction of property. It's not going to do that. That's not the way this works.
And I'm really just trying to clarify the timeline and going back to Friday night, if you could. What was you've described some of the actions that took place with the throwing of the items. Just, did that happen before that call, just to clarify, because what we've heard, I wanted to make sure.
We have always responded to an attack. Decisions were based on the aggressive actions of suspects, and that's how we responded. And even though we were attacked, before we deployed any gas canisters, we certainly gave ample warning so that anybody who wasn't involved in the criminal behavior, they could exit. Some did. And we didn't give just one warning, but several warnings. So people had plenty of time to go. And even if you watched our tactics, even as we give the warnings, and before the officers who have the helmets and shields and batons, as they're going forward, they're continuing to give the warning. So individuals who are not involved in criminality have an opportunity to leave.
Thank you.
Okay, we have just a few questions from reporters who are watching remotely today. Steve Carmody from Michigan Radio has a question for the mayor. Wants to know if you can clarify or indicate how the curfew may affect any businesses that are preparing to reopen, such as restaurants.
Didn't affect any businesses at all. The going to and from a commercial business is exempt from the curfew. So every business should be open on whatever hours they want to open on, and the curfew doesn't restrict anybody going to or from a business.
Okay. Eli Newman from WDET says that last night or yesterday sometime, former President Obama had suggested that cities review police codes and policies as it relates to use of force, I believe. And he wanted to know if that's something, Mayor, that you'd be doing here in the city.
It's something I'm enormously familiar with because when I was the prosecutor, and I was dealing with a Detroit Police Department that was the #1 police department in America in shooting of civilians, and I was dealing with that, the Justice Department came in. And the Detroit Police Department was put under federal Justice Department oversight for 10 years. The central requirement of that was new use of force policies. I think you will find the Detroit Police Department has model policies requiring reports to be made on every use of force. It requires accountability. I think when you go back and look at it, and we are going to review, I know the governor talked about that, but a big part of why you've seen the people of Detroit respond to the Detroit Police Department this way is what President Obama said works. I mean, literally, the culture of the Detroit Police Department. When I became prosecutor, if the Detroit Police Department's practice was, if you were on a site of a shooting and you didn't want to talk, they locked you up as a suspect for a homicide. I mean, it was unbelievable. They'd have 5, 6 people as suspects, basically because they figured that was the way they were going to squeeze you. You look at the way the department operated in the late 1990s, the early 2000s, and you look at the progress under the Justice Department. When Chief Craig got here, we came into full compliance and the Justice Department oversight ended. But I think Detroit is an example that what President Obama said is true. You have got to be rigorous about your use of force policies, and you have to demand accountability from any officer that violates them. And I think it has worked well here.
Okay. And 2 final questions from Ken Coleman at Bridge Magazine. First one is, you want to know if you have any assessment, Mr. Mayor, on the state HHS handling of COVID in terms of its communications and messaging to the public.
You know, Dr. Caldoun, who is a friend as well as an outstanding administrator, I think has done extremely well. She walked into a health department that did not have basic reporting protocols from hospitals, from local agencies, from nursing homes. I mean, essentially, they had to create the entire system from scratch. And so Denise Fair created the city nursing home site, and it turned out, when we were trying to find state information, we turned out didn't have any. And so I think Dr. Caldoun has done a marvelous job of, in the middle of a crisis, building a reporting system that didn't exist. And if you look at where Michigan is now, and I mean, new cases in Michigan and new deaths in Michigan are below that of Ohio. That wasn't true at all 4 weeks ago, 6 weeks ago. I think Dr. Caldoun deserves enormous credit.
All right, and closer to home, we'd also like to know what your assessment is of Ms. Fair and her handling of
We're
COVID.
thinking about keeping her.
Oh, thank you.
So, you know, this is, how long were you on the job before this hit?
9 months.
And hasn't she been amazing?
No, actually, 6 months, actually. Just
6
6
months.
months in. Yeah.
So I took probably 3 or 4 months. When Dr. Caldoun left, I took 3 or 4 months. I turned down about 7 or 8 candidates because I needed somebody. This has been a troubled department that has turned over a lot. And just as Dr. Caldoun was starting to get it going the right way, she left for the state of Michigan. And so Director Fair came in at a really tough time. She's been pulling that department together and was hit with this, and I think she has done absolutely an outstanding job.
All right, that was the last question.
All right.